And if Obama can say it, I can say it too, right? Welcome to the program In Conversation with Zora Neale Hurston. I remember. You know, my name is Jacinta Mathis. I'm an attorney here in Orlando, and I sit on the board of Preserve Eatonville Community, along with Mr. Reggie McGill, who's our treasurer. And Preserve Eatonville Community with PEC, as we normally sometimes call it, the P stands for Pride of Heritage, the E for Educational Excellence, and the C for Culture and the Arts. And that's what we're here to celebrate today. We have always valued our partnership with Rollins College. As a matter of fact, there's a special connection between Zora Neale Hurston and Rollins College. E.O. Glover was a Rollins College professor here and a longtime friend of Zora Neale Hurston. And Mr. Glover's daughter, Frances Glover, made a significant donation to the Zora Neale Hurston collection in 1970 and 1971. So the PEC board is honored to continue that relationship with Rollins College and Zora Neale Hurston. I want to bring up to you today, and welcome. And I want to bring up to you today Dr. Julian Chambliss. Mr. Chambliss is supposed to be here today. He could have been in an airplane accident in December, but he was preserved just for this day here. So I want you to welcome the Dr. Chambliss, and let's really show him our appreciation that he's here today.
Anything I say would be a letdown after that. So I'll try to keep this brief. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to Rollins College on behalf of the college community, and especially on behalf of our President Grant Cornwell, who couldn't be here today. He had a conflict, but he very much wanted to be. As the chair of the Department of History, of course, this is a very memorable day for me because I realized that Rollins has a very deep and meaningful relationship with Zora Neale Hurston. So this is a momentous occasion because we're rekindling that very real relationship. We have several people from Rollins that are going to speak to you about the importance of our community, and its connections. So our first guest to follow me is Abby Holleran.
Good morning. So this morning I get to welcome you on behalf of our Center for Inclusion and Campus Involvement. So that means that I stand before you welcoming you on behalf of our 121 student organizations, cultural organizations, and faith-based organizations. I stand before you on behalf of, on the shoulders of many who complete countless hours of trainings and workshops on campus to develop our students, staff, and faculty into more thoughtful and informed leaders. I stand before you on behalf of the work that our campus does in the community with over 250 community partners and nonprofit organizations. So I could go on and on about what the long title of our office means that Dr. Chambliss teases me about relentlessly, but I wanted to talk to you about our values very briefly and welcome you on those. So we aspire to be a community that values inclusion. We embrace all that you bring, all that you are, and all that you will become. We are made better by your diverse perspectives that make up our community. We aspire to be a community that values courageous leadership. We are committed to the origin of courage, to speak one's mind by telling all of one's heart. Your leadership is defined by your actions and not your position. We aspire to be a community that values authenticity. We celebrate your individual true self and the transformative experiences that impact your identity. And lastly, we aspire to be a community that values social change. We admire and encourage your contributions to create a more socially just community through your collective and individual actions. I hope that you find your time this morning on our campus to embody those values, and I look forward to learning alongside you this morning.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jill Jones, and I am a professor in the Department of English and the director of the Lucy Cross Center for Women and Their Allies. And on behalf of both of those, what are they? They're not both departments, but on behalf of the English department and the Lucy Cross Center, I'd like to welcome you. I'm really honored to see you all here, and I'm really delighted to see the Zora Neale Hurston Festival coming to Rollins. I usually come to you, and I'm a very big fan of the festival. I'm very much a fan of Zora Neale Hurston, so I'd just like to talk just a second about her as a writer, as an artist, as a social scientist, as a minor celebrity, maybe a major celebrity, but most of all, as a woman who wrote herself into history and into fame. Excuse me, a little cold. As an African-American woman in the 1920s and 1930s from the South, Zora Neale Hurston, as you know, first published a short story that won a prize. She published a novel, but it's her second major work that I'd like to talk about very briefly. Don't worry, very briefly. Mules and Men. Zora Neale Hurston wrote herself into social science. She was writing as an anthropologist, which required her to take on a tone of authority, right? To somehow prove herself, which is hard. The amount of people who write themselves into history and write themselves into authority, it's a pretty small handful when you think about it. Again, to be a Southern black woman in the United States in the 1920s and 30s, to be able to do this through just words is quite a feat. And I find Hurston to be just masterful in her command of the language. So as somebody who studies narrative voice, I'm in awe of Zora Neale Hurston, and I'm not going to give you my whole long, boring excitement and dissertation and thesis on Zora Neale Hurston. I'm going to recommend that if you have not read, and I presume most of you in the audience have read Zora Neale Hurston, but if you haven't, maybe start with some of the short stories that are online, right? Which is, and I may be speaking mostly to our students here, right? Spunk, Gilded Six Bits, Sweat. That's my personal favorite because I love a revenge ending. But it's also worth looking at her anthropological texts. A woman who was the first anthropologist in the United States to raise folk stories and the black culture to an art form and to tell the world that it was an art form. It's worth watching what she does narratively in those texts. So I'm going to read from her autobiography, Dust Tracks on a Road, which she wrote. It was published in 1943, but she wrote this in about 1941, and she already had some fame at this point. Excuse me. She says, "While I am still below the allotted span of time, and notwithstanding, I feel that I have lived. I have had the joy and pain of strong friendships. I have served and been served. I have made enemies of which I am not ashamed. I have been faithless, and then I have been faithful and steadfast until the blood ran down into my shoes. I have loved unselfishly with all the ardor of a strong heart, and I have hated with all the power of my soul. What waits for me in the future? I do not know. I can't even imagine, and I am glad for that. But already I have touched the four corners of the horizon, for from hard searching it seems to me that tears and laughter, love and hate make up the sum of life." I think she speaks better for herself than I can for her, and I think you can see how she wrote herself into fame. Thank you very much again. Welcome.
Good morning. I'm N.Y. Nathiri, the Executive Director of the Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community Incorporated. And in that capacity, you have already met, and I want to acknowledge our board member, Ms. Jacinta Mathis. We also have other board members here who are present, and I want to acknowledge them. Mr. Reginald McGill, our treasurer, Ms. Harrietta Finley Spencer White. On behalf of our organization, we want to express our appreciation to the Rollins College community for continuing the relationship that we have enjoyed over the last almost 3 decades. It is important for us to have been able to host the In Conversation here because of the connection between Rollins College and the Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community. I want to acknowledge especially one of the members, former members of the faculty of Rollins, who serves on our national planners, and that is Dr. Deidre Crumbly, who is currently a professor at North Carolina State University. Want to acknowledge Dr. Ann Adams, who has served on the board of the national planners for the last several years, and who works as a liaison with the Zora Neale Hurston family. Before I leave the podium, I do want to recognize the particular relationship that we enjoy with the Zora Neale Hurston Trust, the fact that we are licensed by them. I want to send regrets for those who have not been able to attend this session, but who will join us later in the afternoon and evening. Thank you very much.
Welcome to In Conversation, the Zora Neale Hurston I Remember, a very special panel discussion presented as part of the 27th Annual Zora Neale Hurston Festival of the Arts and Humanities. I'm Ben Brotmarkle, Executive Director of the Florida Historical Society and host of the radio and television programs Florida Frontiers. And the Florida Historical Society is very honored to be participating once again in the Zora Festival. In fact, when we are done here, I hope you'll make it down to the outdoor festival portion of this event, where the Florida Historical Society has a big tent with educational displays. I'm also very happy we're here at Rollins College for this particular event. Rollins is my alma mater, and I'm always happy to be here. And Rollins was an institution that was very supportive of Zora Neale Hurston from the very beginning. They staged her play, for example, From Sun to Sun, a day in the life of a railroad camp on this campus, and that production was reconstructed and presented here again as part of previous Zora Neale Hurston festivals. In the 1930s and 40s, of course, writer, folklorist, and anthropologist Zora Neale Hurston was a celebrated figure of the Harlem Renaissance. Hurston's best remembered for her 1937 novel Their Eyes Were Watching God, the story of Janie Crawford and her attempts at self-realization. Hurston's other novels include Jonah's Gourd Vine, the story of an unfaithful man with an understanding wife, Moses, Man of the Mountain, a retelling of the biblical story of Moses, and Seraph on the Swanee, Hurston's only book that features white people as main characters. She also, of course, studied with Franz Boas, really the father of American cultural anthropology. And as an anthropologist, Zora Neale Hurston published 2 collections of folklore, Mules and Men and Tell My Horse. Hurston also was very prolific. She wrote dozens of short stories, essays, dramatic works, and, of course, her autobiography, Dust Tracks on a Road. But we're not here today to analyze Zora Neale Hurston's literary works or critique her work as an anthropologist. Our purpose this morning is to discuss the person, the human being who produced those works. And to do that, we've brought together a very special group of 3 people with direct connections to Zora Neale Hurston. We'll be hearing today from Mrs. Ella Augusta Johnson Dinkins, who was mentioned in Zora Neale Hurston's collection of folklore, Mules and Men. Hurston called her one of the pretty Johnson girls. Mrs. Dinkins' mother, Mrs. Addie Gramling Johnson, was a personal friend of Zora's. Mrs. Dinkins is also the mother of N.Y. Nathiri, who you just heard from, the founding director of this wonderful festival, now in its 27th year. Dr. Clifford Hurston Jr. is the nephew of Zora Neale Hurston. His father, Clifford Hurston Sr., was the brother of Zora Neale Hurston. His sister, Mrs. Vivian Hurston Bowden, is the niece of Zora Neale Hurston. Her father, Clifford Hurston Sr., was the son of the Reverend John Hurston and Lucy Potts Hurston, who were also Zora's parents. So we have a very special panel, all people very closely associated with Zora Neale Hurston. I'm going to be asking them a few questions, but then we'll also take your questions, so be thinking about what you'd like to ask this esteemed panel. But right now, please welcome Mrs. Dinkins, Dr. Hurston, and Mrs. Bowden. Well, Mrs. Dinkins, I'd like to start with you. In her autobiography, Dust Tracks on a Road, Zora claimed to be born in Eatonville, and while she was raised there, she was actually born in Alabama, but she repeatedly goes back to Eatonville in her works. What is it about Eatonville that made Zora want to claim it as her birthplace?
Well, Eatonville was a small town that people grew up in families, and each person knew everyone that was there. And Zora was a very wonderful person. Even though she was educated, most educated people don't deal with little children. They deal with people in their same age bracket. But Zora reached out to the children and taught them how to do different things.
Well, Dr. Hurston, by the time you were a young boy, Zora Neale Hurston was already a famous writer, but you met her, of course. What do you remember about meeting Zora Neale Hurston?
Well, a young boy. Boy, that's been quite a few years ago, too. When we lived in Alabama, matter of fact, I didn't know too much about Aunt Zora because my parents didn't talk about the relatives too much because, as you know, they all split up at a very young age after the marriage of second marriage of my father's father. But then we moved to Sanford when I was in the 10th grade, and then somehow that I got to meet her. At the time, she was in Ugali, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. She was in Ugali. And we went down to visit her, and I was about in, I think, the 10th grade then. And at the time, she was an aunt, you know. She's no one famous, she's just my aunt. But anyway, as time moved on and I got to know more about her, read about her, I said, boy, I have a famous aunt. So then I understood what it was all about. That was my first meeting of her.
Great. Well, Mrs. Bowden, Zora lived, as we were talking about, in Brevard County twice, once in 1929 when she wrote her most important collection of folklore, Mules and Men, and again for much of the 1950s when she worked on her unpublished novel, Herod the Great. And that's where you met her, right, in Brevard County. What do you remember most about your famous aunt?
Well, when I first met her, I was astonished. You know, I thought she was really tall, and she had put on weight, according to some pictures that I had seen previously. But she was an amazing person. You know, I've been dreaming about what was her voice really like. So I guess it must have been similar to mine. You can be heard. But it was excellent. It was in Ugali, as my brother Clifford said, that she and my dad had many conversations on the telephone. And so Dad says, well, we need to go and visit her. And so this was my first time. And I probably was a sophomore or going into my junior year in college. And so when we drove up to Ugali, and I have been trying to rack my brains to figure out what street it was on, but I do remember the house. It was a very old-timey house, I should say, very small. garden with flowers. But the only thing I really didn't like was the sulfur stream in the yard, the sulfur water. Have you ever smelled that? You remember that, Clifford?
Of course, of course.
Oh, I thought it was a rotten egg around somewhere. And so she had to explain, because that was my first time smelling that type of water. And so she explained to us, you know, what type it was, and it was very healthy, because she was a health nut. Because she had problems with her health. So she was working on all kind of remedies to help an intestinal problem that she had.
And we have a letter from Zora written from O'Galley talking
Yeah.
about the well and doing
It was
the gardening
powerful.
work in her
It
yard.
was powerful.
Well, Mrs. Denkins, as I mentioned earlier, you were actually described in one of Hurston's books, and you were talking about how she talked to kids, and your mother, of course, was a good friend of hers. What are some of your earliest recollections of her?
Well, Zora, to me, she comforted us as children. As a general rule, little children are in the way, and they push you aside, but Zora came to us as a mother. Zora was excellent. And when I say that, not only in her education, but in her acts and her ways. Because a person that's educated don't really tend to little children. They kind of, you in my way. You understand what I'm saying? But she would always cover us, love us, because that was just her way.
Well, Dr. Hurston, your father, Clifford Hurston Sr., was a math teacher at Crooms Academy, and there were other relatives of Zora who were also professional people. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, of course, we came from a teaching-oriented family. My father was a math teacher. My mother was a librarian. Even on my mother's side, her brother was the principal of Parker High School in Birmingham, Alabama. At that time, it was the largest so-called, quote, Negro school during that time in the South. And also, his son was principal of Parker High School. Let's see else. What else happened here? I became an educator because my father was an educator, and I felt that this is the way I should go. So I ended up teaching at universities, junior high, and a couple of high schools. Yeah. So we're basically from an educational family. I think that was coming through Zora too. Yes.
I'm going to interject. Dad was the teacher and Mom was the student. So Mom met Dad while he was teaching her in one of the higher education classes. And so that's how they met.
Interesting. Well, Mrs. Bowden, your brother mentioned the house in Sanford, and you lived there as a girl as well. And that house was built by your grandfather, right? Zora's father.
Okay. When we moved to Florida in 1952, I was still in high school. So I stayed in Birmingham until I finished school.
Oh, okay.
And so Clifford, Dad, and Mom came to Florida.
Okay.
And of course, Mr. Crooms was the negotiator for this big move that we had made to Florida. And the reason that the Crooms interjected in our history is because when my grandfather remarried, the new wife, she had 8 children. My grandmother Lucy had 8 children, and 2 girls, Sarah and Zora, and then the 6 boys. And my dad was right under Zora, so they were kind of together. They played egg toss in the yard. They did a lot of that, you know, because you were not going out buying toys during those days. And grapefruits and oranges were the greatest weapons for bombing each other. And they loved that. So when grandfather remarried, the lady from, I think she was from Movita, named the Oxidine family, she did not want any of the kids in her life. She wanted to get rid of them. And for someone who was a stout preacher, laying down the law, get in there and preach the sermon, people falling all over the floor because he's giving this gospel. But some reason grandfather couldn't control the family. And that was kind of strange. Didn't you think that was strange, Cliff?
That's why they left.
Yeah, that was really strange. So therefore, they all went somewhere. So Aunt Zora went with Sarah. Sarah took the baby, which was a boy. And Aunt Zora kind of moved towards Sanford. The Crooms adopted my dad. So that's how they became our foster grandparents. And so that's what everything revolved. And so the family did get a chance to see each other off and on during the years, you know, funerals, but we never had a reunion. We haven't had one to this day yet. So, but yet and still, there was just a little contact from one another.
May I say something also? I must commend the Zora Festival for bringing the Hurston family together. I mean, without this festival, I probably have not known quite a few of my niece, nephew, cousins, distant cousins, and strangers in the family too. But anyway, it's just been marvelous. And I think this is one of the highlights to us as a Hurston that this festival has done for us. Yes.
Thank you.
And you did live in the house, right, that your grandfather built, Zora's
When you,
father?
The house you're talking about, the one in Sanford? Okay. That house was built by Mr. Crooms, our adopted grandfather, whatever. My father was a carpenter on the side, you know? So he built the front porch of it, and it's still there. And now, I've forgotten the person that bought it, but it's been renovated and going to try to be on the historical list soon.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Well, Mrs. Dinkins, your mother was a personal friend of Zora's, but isn't it true that not everyone in Eatonville appreciated Zora writing about their town and its people?
That is true, because there were families there that were uneducated. I mean, they didn't go to college. They went maybe the first or second grade, and that was it, because in Eatonville, orange groves were the most popular things there. And people knew how to graft the grapefruit and the orange trees into one or the other. And Eatonville is a very historical town with a lot of things, farming and groves and teachers and colleges, hung for school. Mr. Calhoun came and started the school there. And there's a lot of different things that you can do in Eatonville to make the people comfortable. There's a school, there's farming, orange groves, grafting, and most men taught their children, boys, how to graft the trees into different varieties. And of course, when you would come to Eatonville, you didn't come down a paved road, you came down a dirt road. And Mr. Brazel got the clay and made the road a clay road. And there's a lot of history in Eatonville that people don't even know anything about.
Well, you talk about how Zora Neale Hurston engaged children, and education was important to her,
yes,
wasn't it?
very important, yes. And she taught children how to do games, and how to do plays, and how to play basketball. She did a whole lot of things to encourage children to learn how to do things. She just wasn't a person, I'm just going to show you what to do, but she got in with them and showed them how to do these things.
Well, Mrs. Bowden, you were actually at Zora Neale Hurston's funeral down in Fort Pierce. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, prior to the funeral, we had gone down previously to Ugali to meet her, and that was really a great meeting. And she gave me a marble mirror at that time, and that was always a treasure to me. She talked, I want to go back to that before we get to the funeral.
Sure.
Down in Ugali, she talked about some of her troubles that she had had coming up through Jacksonville and New York and different areas, and how she was kind of looked over for some things. And as she said, the colored population did not recognize a lot of the work that she had put forth. And I think at that time she was working on some kind of manuscript. Then when we went down again, she was in the St. Lucie, I would say kind of a retirement place. She was very sick, and she had had a stroke. And so we did go down. My brother was not with us at that time. And we went down to visit her. And you could just tell that she had just aged so advanced in her stage with her intestines, her diabetes. But she was still a proud lady. She was still proud. She didn't want any handouts. We offered to do things for her. She says, no. She says, I came in this world with nothing. I want to go out with nothing. And we had some things for her, and she gave them to the other people that were sick in this particular location. And then in 1960, I remember that because that was my first year teaching. And we went down, and she had passed, and we were at the funeral, and a lot of the write-ups said there were 3 people there, and the 3 were my dad, my mom, and myself. It was in a tent outside of the funeral home, and there were about 85, 100 people that were there from the community. And, you know, just a regular, nice service of singing and different people speaking about her. And she stayed with a family that was a classmate of mine at Bethune-Cookman. And so when you get back to the Bethune-Cookman, in some of my research, I just found out that she received a literary award in '56. And that was my senior year. So some reason I missed her. I didn't know she was on campus. And I kind of regret that. But a lot of things was not published during those days. You know, you just showed up and whoever was there would witness. And so the funeral was very nice, and we went to the gravesite. And that's the way she wanted it. You know, that's the way she wanted it. And so who are we to go against what a person wishes?
I know, may I say this also? I know my mother said when they went down to visit her, I was in college during a lot of this action, and they did not bring me home for this, some of the things. But anyway, when she went down there and she saw the conditions that my aunt was living in, the small home with crates, and she was typing on top of an orange crate and using as a desk, and kerosene lamps around. Mm-hmm. So my mother and father says, as I was told, say, Zora, let us help you. And she said they went out and put a down payment on another apartment for her, and she wouldn't move. She says, I don't want to live in luxury. Although it may not be, in quote, luxury she thought it may be, but she considered it to be luxury, and she stayed there. And that was, so I would say, a couple of years before she became seriously ill.
You know what's fascinating about our life? To know that when you're born, everyone has a talent. And if you don't strike it while you have that feeling, you're not going to use what you know. And to me, Aunt Zora was that person that knew that she loved to tell stories, whether they were big lies or small lies or no lies. She knew how to get people, you know how some people can rub you the wrong way and you, oh gosh, why am I around this person? And she was that kind of person that when she believed in something, she's gonna stick to it. And that was the impression that I got when I went to visit her. Because she says, I'm working for these people. She was talking about the white people in the neighborhood. And she would go in and cook, clean up. She was struggling that much. She didn't have hardly any money doing all of this writing. She didn't make anything hardly off of her books. And she says, they don't even know who I am. I don't want anything published. But when she went to work at that library at the Patrick's Air Force Base, she really became political in her belief. She was really for women's rights. We need her right here today, I tell you. But anyway, she was really good about speaking out on what she believed. And I can't think who the governor was at that time, but she didn't get along with a lot of politicians because she spoke a word. So some of her articles never made the newspaper because when they got to the editor, they cut them out. So she was, all I'm gonna say is that she was determined, she was a driver, and she just believed in what she believed, and she didn't care what you said about it. She wanted to do what she thought was the right thing for her lifestyle.
And sometimes that took a surprising turn because she, for example, opposed the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision, which of course integrated public schools, but she opposed it because she felt that it would do damage to the African American schools, and
She did.
she proved to be correct, of course, in the short term.
Still going on today.
Yeah. So, well, Dr. Hurston, you did visit her. You missed her funeral, as we were talking about, but you did visit her in Brevard County. What do you remember about how she was living and her as a person?
Well, at that time, when I visited her with my sister Andra, my father says, Clifford, why don't you go out and play and do some things like that? So, of course, he thought that I would not be interested in the conversation at the time. You know, children not heard, you know, at that time. Don't speak, you hear. But anyway, I remember Aunt Zora telling the story. I must tell the story. And how true it is, who knows? But she was talking about traveling, how she used to travel. And so she was going in the South, and she was driving down this highway, and she was speeding. And then she got to a stop sign that she mentioned, and she just, she remembers, she said, I stopped, but the cop stopped me anyway, and I wonder why. So the cop said, girl, didn't you see that stop sign? And she said, what stop sign? And she said, he says, the one back there. He said, the one with the S-T-O-P on it. She says, oh my God, is that what that spells? and then he said, oh, I always wonder what that spells. And so he said, oh woman, you're crazy, go on. So she goes, and I always remember that about her. And of course, when I visit her, they talk more about her condition. They talk more about her health things. And at 13, 14, you know, you didn't think of health. You know, I remember hearing elder people talk about their pains and things, you know. Now I understand what they're talking about. But at that time, you know, who wants to hear something like that? So a lot of the conversation about her conditions and everything, I didn't hear. But speaking of the sulfur water, my mother had a habit of holding my hand and squeezing it when she think I was out of line. And so when I got there, I said, oh my God, what is this stinky smell I smell. And my mother grabbed my hand and squeezed it, you know. And so, of course, they understand. And even today, where I live, we have a well. And it reminds me, and since we're talking about sulfur water, I guess from now on, every time I smell the water, I also think of Aunt Zora because of the incident at that time. But yes, but I do remember that, as my sister stated, first time seeing her, we were sitting out in the yard, and we were all in her garden, and she was extremely overweight, like you said. I can vividly remember this kind of a house coat dress kind of deal.
House dress.
Dress. It was, I can see it now. It was just a regular round neckline with the little puffs kind of sleeves.
Checky.
Yes, and also her arms are very large, you know. And I said, wow, she's a big lady, you know, just like that. And she grabbed and hugged me, and she, I remember talking about being proud who you are, do the best you can, and also, you know, make something of yourself, you know. And those are some of the things I got from her during that time, in midst of my running around the trees and everything else. Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Well, let's. I'm sure there's some questions that the audience wants to ask. Does anybody have a question for any of our panelists? Sure. Do we have another mic, or do I need to bring this one? Oh, there we go. We've got questions written. Or I could just, if they're written, I can just, thank you.
No, I did not.
Thank you. Okay, this question is for Mrs. Bowden and Dr. Hurston. What do you think of the fictionalized representation of your grandfather in Zora Neale Hurston's novel, Jonah's Gourd Vine?
Well, grandfather was real stern, but I don't think he was really directed towards what each of the kids really needed besides, you know, getting an education. And I think he was so stern that he and Aunt Zora clicked a lot. And I remember she teased him once about, I want a pony. And he got so upset that she had requested this that she just started laughing because she knew it was a joke in the first place. So he was a very stern man, very strict. And my dad was strict too.
Oh, yes, especially for you.
So I think it's a family trait, yes. College was a blessing.
Okay, did you want to add
Oh,
anything?
well, from her book, I feel that it's a guide for parenthood. As far as everyone can read it, they can identify something with it that's related to their lives. And we all raise our children, although I don't have any. I taught enough, I might as well say I raised them. But anyway, I think we can pick out the things that we can identify with, the things that we accept, the things we don't accept. So as far as her relationship with her father, I think it's just a way that it was an outlet for her to express how she felt. Well, they were all exactly true or not, because by just reading and hearing from Aunt Zora, you have to sometimes wonder what is fiction and what is facts.
But you know what?
But that's what made it so exciting. Yes.
So true. But you know what? Those kids did not like his attitude toward them over the new wife. That was the main issue. I mean, who's going to give your 8 kids away to satisfy a new wife who was mean and disruptive? Thank you.
But Zora also called her father a womanizer. So that kind of tells you the background for the for her relationship with her parents, you know.
She loved her mom, though.
Remember, we pick our friends, but we don't pick our parents.
Well, Zora certainly did take some creative license even in her nonfiction. We talked about Dust Tracks on a Road, and you know that opens with everybody running around in Eatonville on the day she was born, but she was actually born in Alabama, of course.
Yes.
And her age too is another issue. She was born in 1891, but moved that date around, shaved about a decade off of her life by the time she died. Mrs. Jenkins, were the folks in Eatonville aware of Zora changing her age, and what did they think about it?
I don't think they really realized that she was changing her age because she didn't act uppity. She was calm and easygoing person, and everyone that knew Zora loved Zora. And if you had a problem, they'd go and ask her, "Can you help me with information?" Because she knew all, with her education, she knew everything to do to help a person to survive.
She was an avid reader,
Yes,
so she was
yes.
way beyond.
Yes,
way
the average
beyond
person,
her
yes.
intellectual ability.
Yeah, I know my father. My father was only 2 years younger than she, so I mean, it wasn't a secret for us when she was born. It was just a secret to others. I guess that was an old form of cosmetic surgery, I guess. And to take off the ages that way.
Ladies don't like to tell, some of them don't like to tell their ages anyway,
No,
you
it's
know
true.
that. But I don't
tell
care, I'm
mine,
just
I'm
proud
proud
to
of
be
mine.
here.
Yeah.
And there's, I guess there's also the theory that perhaps she shaved those years off of her age because she went back to
That's
get her
right.
high school
That's
diploma,
right.
and she was too old to enter school, but she wanted to finish her degree, so she wrote some years off of her,
Yeah, because
of
she
her
was in
age.
school while kids were going to college, you know, and she's still trying to get high school. But you know, that's determination.
Sure.
She didn't have to get a high school education, but she knew she had to have it.
Well, that brings us back to another audience question. It says, despite early hardships, Zora achieved, and the Hurston family excelled and valued education and achieved from the early 1900s. What were the influence that inspired the other Hurstons, including you and Zora's other relatives?
I think all of us educated college. Uncle John was a butcher,
Yes.
so he didn't go to college.
No.
He lived in Jacksonville. Oh, he was the sweetest man you ever want to see. So we all instilled that, you know, you have to get the education, you know. Now what you do with it is your business, but you need to get it. And so that's always inspired, and no question.
As for, may I say something about that? I started off, my father always, first of all, my father wanted me to be a preacher. Okay, because his father was a preacher, and my grandfather on my mother's side was a preacher.
Yes.
I mean, really, that was enough preachers in the family, I thought. So then, being in education, I loved school. You know, I could have been a professional student all my life, but I had to stop sometime. But anyway, it was just inbred in us. And Dad will always tell us that he got his master's from Columbia when there were only a few blacks getting masters at Columbia during that time, but way before I was born, and I was born just a few years ago. But anyway, he would say, I want you to be better than I am. He always said that to us.
Have more
you know.
education.
And he would look at his brothers, and he had brothers that were dentists and doctors and everything else. So it was just an environment that was conducive for us to do so, you know. And
Clifford did reach his goal because he passed Daddy with the master and got his doctors. I didn't.
But you did a lot of other things, though.
I did masters, yeah.
Well, you mentioned earlier, Dr. Hurston, that she was just Aunt Zora, that you weren't really aware of the fact that she'd been this famous Harlem Renaissance writer. When did you realize who she was to the rest of the world?
What really, it only started after I was teaching by 5 or 6 years, and then I taught at the university level, and there were people that would recognize the name. Mm-hmm. And they said, "Are you kin to Zora Neale Hurston?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And I kept hearing that until I started doing some added reading, started questioning things, and because Aunt Zora to my father was his sister, you know. And it was the idea that we are proud what you do, but that's your accomplishments. We don't piggyback on someone's accomplishments. We try to make our own. So that's one reason why we just really consider her as a writer, and then eventually a famous writer, and then an extraordinary genius. Yes.
Mrs. Dinkins, how about you and the folks in Eatonville? Were you aware as Zora's career was going on, were people aware that she was so famous, or did that come later?
Not at that time, but at this time now, Zora is tops.
It's after the fact. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Mrs. Bowden, here's a question from the audience. Of course, Alice Walker wrote the famous essay that kind of revived interest in Zora after she died. This question is, do you think Alice Walker found the right gravesite? Because that essay was about how she went and, as I recall, threw a stone and identified, put up the gravestone. Do you think she found... Is that in the right place?
Yeah, we're okay. We didn't want it moved. That was an issue about moving it and taking it here and taking it there. And Aunt Zora was in a place where she wanted to be. She wanted to be in the Fort Pierce area. She liked that area. She wanted to, and she died there. She wrote nothing about, I want to move and go somewhere else. So she's at peace. Thanks to Alice. Thank you. She's at peace.
Well, Mrs. Dinkins, how has your relationship with Zora Neale Hurston and knowing her, how has that impacted your life?
Very great, because I would like to learn how to write like Zora did. And even though I have been through high school and a little school at St. Augustine at the college there, but you still need more push to do these kind of things. People engage you. I think you can do so and so and so and so, but do you think yourself, can you do it? You have to know within yourself that you can advance yourself. And if you don't realize what you can do about yourself, then it's nothing.
Well, Dr. Hurston, how about you? How has being related to Zora impacted your life?
Fabulously. Oh, no. It made me appreciate struggle. It made me appreciate that you can accomplish basically whatever you want to, providing you have the facilities and knowledge and talent to do so. That old saying that you can do anything you want to, it's not really true. But you have to have just more than wish and determination. It gave me an opportunity to appreciate what I have and appreciate my family history more, and to be able to be outspoken. I find myself two characteristics that she has. I'm quite outspoken. I say what I want to when I want to, sometimes at the wrong time. And another thing that I was called at one time the Wanderer, because I love to travel. I love to go. I can't stay in one place too long. I think that's why my career went by so fast, because I was never a place too long. I was there for 3 or 4 years and off to another challenge. So I think I have inherited a lot of her traits, which I'm fortunate to possess.
Mrs. Bowden, how about you? How has being related to Zora impacted your life?
I like theaters, theatricals. I used to be in plays and dancing and on stage, and I like to travel. And I just think, and I'm kind of outspoken. I was kind of quiet in college, but as I grew, I became to speak and say what I needed to say. Love teaching. Love the kids. I started with 3rd grade, moved all the way up into 9th grade. And then you have to find your level that you like. And my level was middle school. Loved it. Loved it today, because that's at that age where they really don't know where they want to go. And they think they're there, but they're not. And they think they're growner than the grown-ups. So it was a challenge every day, but I loved it. And when I wrote my retirement letter to retire, I cried, because I really didn't want to, but it was time. Thanks goodness I'm not there today. But anyway, things have changed, so. But I think she has that inspired coming from her, just to be yourself, do the best that you can. And I have 2 kids, and especially my daughter. I think she's a little Zora. She loves to travel, and she never stays in any place past 5 years. When we're counting now, it's my husband. And so we said, well, she's got 1 more year where she is in Alexandria, Virginia. And I said, be on the lookout. She's going to be on the move again. So I think we got that in our blood, to travel, to seek, to help, be concerned, and be loving, because I'm a family people person, and I think that's what she was.
Great.
They call me the cruise boat organizer.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks to each of our panel here, Mrs. Ella Augusta Johnson-Denkins, who was, as I mentioned, was mentioned in Zora Neale Hurston's collection of folklore, Mules and Men, being called one of the Pretty Johnson girls, Dr. Clifford Hurston Jr., the nephew of Zora Neale Hurston, and Mrs. Vivian Hurston Bowden, niece of Zora Neale Hurston. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You were great. You were great.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Enjoy the rest of the festival.